About anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is a Friday edition of Point of View. And of course, as this opportunity always provides us a chance to hear from people around the round table, Jeff Mateer, Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Counsel for First Liberty Institute, and Holly Randall, Associate Counsel for First Liberty Institute as well. We will get into some of the First Liberty stories, but let me give you a preview in a few minutes. We will talk about Venezuela. I know that's a surprise, but that has been a topic for this week. And a very good piece that came out from the Wall Street Journal about, well, what do we do if we have Venezuela and we have oil? What are we going to do there? We certainly will, somewhere along the line, talk about what has been happening in Minnesota and now what's been happening in Portland. Minneapolis and Portland are two areas. We also certainly want to talk about what's happening in Iran, and then we'll bring it back to some domestic policy issues. But since the other day we had an individual arguing that we should not annex Greenland, Roger Kimball says we should annex Greenland. So before we're done, we'll have that and a piece by Penna Dexter. But Holly, let me come to you first. The article I've posted to remove a flag from a military base residence. And again, people might say, well, can I see what the flag looks like? Yes, because we are immediately linked to a press release for First Liberty. You can see this flag says, Jesus is my king, Trump is my president, but can't post that flag apparently. Talk about that.
Yeah, you'll notice on the flag it contains two factual statements. So it's almost like the military is telling you, don't put a flag up that says the sky is blue. You know, if you're a Christian and American, those are two facts. And the reason that First Liberty got involved is because the I guess, neighborhood, the military housing is not applying their policies equally. So there's pride flags hanging up, and there's other sort of, you know, personal adornment flags, I guess you could call them, I don't know, personality flags hanging. And we're just asking for our client, Technical Sergeant Durant, to be treated just like the people that are able to fly those flags. So if the opposition is to two factual statements that are there on the flag, then we're making sure that he has his rights protected.
And again, pretty straightforward, but I thought you might want to know about that particular case. And reason we bring these up, Holly, is because other people might find themselves in the same set of circumstances. So again, this one, you would hope just with a letter would be enough, but who knows? Sometimes these cases drag on for quite a long period of time.
Yeah, and you say other people might find themselves in their circumstance. This is the second case where we have had an issue with flags on military bases. So, you know, one time it happens. Second time we're starting to see a pattern. So there may be people that know these kind of things going on, and that's something that First Liberty Institute is ready to help with. We have places online on our website, firstliberty.org, that you can go and say, hey, I'm having this problem too. I'm being treated unequally by my military base housing, and that's how you get a hold of us.
And last week, we, of course, talked with Aaron about some of the issues, whether it was the dog tags or a variety of other issues. So certainly those of you in the military, I want you to know that First Liberty is willing to help you out. But I thought just real quickly, Jeff, we might talk about another case. And this one is, again, the Pennsylvania Township applies a different standard, a double standard, to, of all things, a Ukrainian church. I would think I would certainly want to be a lot more careful with a church of people from Ukraine, given all that those people have been through. But nevertheless, there we are.
I mean, Western Pennsylvania, which actually is fairly conservative. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, probably about 2 hours from where this township is, which is outside Pittsburgh. So so everyone should think Western Pennsylvania. And we're seeing, and like the matter Holly talked about, this is a recurring type of situation that we're seeing across the country. If you recall, we talked about a case in California where you expect in California government officials to be hostile to people of faith. I mean, we kind of expect that. I don't expect that in some place like Pennsylvania. Certainly maybe in Philadelphia, but the rest of Pennsylvania, no. But this is one in which this historic Ukrainian Catholic Church wants to build a new chapel on its property. They have property. They want to build and have a new chapel. And they want to do something outrageous. They want to ring bells, Kerby. They want to actually ring bells at their Ukrainian church. And the township in Pennsylvania, Collier Township, is prohibiting them from doing that. And we got contacted and we started asking questions like, well, what are other things? Well, down the road, there's a union hall, and they were able to construct their property. And there are others. There's amusement parks, there's ice rinks, there's fitness centers. I mean, everyone else is able to do it. But when people of faith want to actually construct something, the township has unreasonable restrictions. So again, this is reoccurring, and it's. I think it goes to, unfortunately, in too many parts of our country, people just don't think churches have any value.
Yes.
And therefore, we really don't want churches. You can't use the property. They can't tax the property. Therefore, we want to do everything we can to discourage. And of course, we know the value of a church and how a church transforms a community. So my prediction is that we will win this case ultimately. My prediction is I hope we don't have to actually litigate this vigorously. That the township will come to their senses, but you never know.
It's the most surprising ones that you think.
Yeah,
I said that about Coach Kennedy. So I said that about Coach Kennedy. So me predicting how long a case is going to last, is probably not very good. But this one's just so. Again, it's one of those outrageous, and we did in California. We sued on behalf of in that case it was a Chinese and Asian American church, and did have to get a preliminary injunction, and then after preliminary injunction we were able to settle it. Maybe this is what will happen here too.
Well, again, while we're talking about churches, about Pastor Chris Avell, because from what I understand, you've got a victory in that regard.
We did. We had a very significant victory in the Ohio Court of Appeals. Appreciate the Attorney General, David Yost, supporting us in that case. And we're waiting to hear yet from the criminal case. But it's a significant, especially, in Ohio right now, because it's freezing and having an order that said they couldn't open their church doors to let people to come in and warm was outrageous, and the appellate court in Ohio agrees with us.
So again, you can find out more by going to First Liberty. As a matter of fact, that's the first thing that pops up here about what is happening there with Pastor Chris Avell, and that is in, of course, the state of Ohio. We've also talked about one in Pennsylvania and many other cases. As you scroll to the very bottom, you will see something that provides you with an opportunity to get the FLI Insider, and that's where you find out about these cases. And so that is all available at First Liberty. So we'll come back and maybe focus some time and attention overseas. We'll get back to what's happening in this country because there's quite a bit. But this is the first time I've had either of you in since we have now brought Nicholas Maduro back to the United States. And that has changed things dramatically. But the piece I have here also from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal says, well, if the president keeps talking about oil, people are going to think that all this was about oil, and it's about a lot more, as we talked about earlier in the week. But what about this? Does this have the opportunity to, number one, affect China, since they purchase 68% of all the oil from Venezuela goes to China? This could change that dramatically, and I think the president might be playing chess in that regard. Number two, is it a possibility that this could be developed so it would help the people of Venezuela? So we have a lot more to cover. Then we'll talk about some of the protests in Iran, and then we'll bring it back to this country. All that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In his book, Peak Human, historian Johann Norberg explains what we can learn from the rise and fall of golden ages. He describes 7 humanity's greatest civilizations, from ancient Athens and the Roman Republic to Renaissance Italy, the Dutch Republic, and today's Anglosphere. Each had their golden age and contributed to our world today. Ancient Greece gave us democracy and the rule of law. From the Muslim world came algebra and modern medicine. The Dutch Republic gave us economic ideas and some of the greatest artistic movements. In a recent interview with John Stossel, he talked about how Rome inspired our form of government, a republic with a system of checks and balances. There's a reason we have a Senate and they meet in the Capitol, Norberg explained. We borrowed these ideas from the Romans. Of course, these empires fell. The emperors wanted to become popular by handing out free stuff to people. Originally, this started small. Just handed the very poor means of subsistence, but it became popular, so the group that lived on the public's expense grew larger all the time. Eventually, the ever-expanding system of entitlements became too much. Norberg observed, Romans could conquer the world, but they couldn't do entitlement reform. To pay for this, the Roman emperors devalued their currency by putting less gold and silver in each coin. He concluded that inflation was much worse than barbarian invaders. This sounds like our world today. Modern governments, including our own, make more financial promises than they can keep. To pay for it, they print more money. We have been living in a golden age, but the question before us today is whether it will continue. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join the conversation, but later we will open up the phones. In studio with us today, Holly Randall and Jeff Mateer. Let's, if we can, talk about Venezuela. And I think in some respects we've covered some of the details, but if nothing else, the editorial board says, again, in another striking show of force, the U.S. military on Wednesday seized 2 sanctioned oil tankers on the open sea. So again, if you're keeping track at home, keeping score at home since we're getting into baseball pretty soon, those of you keeping score, I think we're down to 4 tankers, as well as Nicolas Maduro, plus his wife, and threats of the fact that if others don't cooperate, there may be other extraditions in light of all of that. So, Holly, what about this? This has been something that, in some respects, President Trump has been warning about, but he didn't just warn, he actually executed this as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I am excited to, live in a country again where a president can make threats like this to be a world superpower and actually follow through on them. I feel like that's something that we missed during the Biden administration, is feeling like, we're in charge here. Don't mess with us. When you do, we'll come get you from your bedroom in the middle of the night. That's kind of what went down here. And, it seems to me, and I'm no foreign policy expert, but it seems to me to be a brilliant move to secure oil for our country. And if it angers China, then I think that's a strategic advantage for us too. If we have access to resources that they would have otherwise had and now do not, I think that seems like an immediately, recognizable good. And so I'm guess excited would be the right word, to just see American military and American intelligence might on display again, making good choices for the security of our country going forward with instability in Asia and the Middle East. And this, we went and got the job done brilliantly at no cost to American lives, I believe, which is incredible.
It is. I mean, you had 2 very successful military actions, both of which were very difficult, quite complex. And if nothing else, Jeff and I are old enough to remember when Jimmy Carter tried to rescue the hostages.
The exact same thing.
I've seen Argo.
I was thinking the exact. Absolutely.
Because we need to educate a youngster here.
She's seen the movie.
Ben Affleck. Have you seen him?
Ben Affleck. Yeah. Well, they failed, and Jimmy Carter, and just horrific. And I was thinking the same thing. If you had an operation, now look, a little different operation, rescuing 51 hostages. hostages, I think, versus taking out a leader and his wife. Although that leader and his wife, I mean, the protection had to been max.
Well, they were thwarted by hitting their head on the hallway. I mean, that your protection can be so good until it's not. Yeah.
Until it's not. I think. I mean, I haven't even had liberals who say. Who are somehow defending Venezuela, the system of Venezuela. I mean, it is a corrupt, in a corrupt system in which the people are being exploited. I mean, to think about it, that and I did not know this until this happened, but that Venezuela is sitting on the largest oil reserves in the world. And you think about the potential and the people and the people of Venezuela have some of the lowest standards in the Western Hemisphere. Now, those two things don't make sense. And so if you believe in freedom and you have an opportunity, and of course, who's the Nobel Peace Prize winner? Well, it's a Venezuelan, Maria Corina Machado, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it is a unique opportunity if you support nation building, and so you have to get over that. If you support nation building, it is a unique opportunity. It does, to me, also show the influence that Marco Rubio currently has in the administration.
For sure, yes.
Because this is something. I mean, this is not just about Venezuela. This is about all of Latin America, mm-hmm. and it's certainly about Cuba.
Cuba's got to be nervous.
It's certainly about Cuba, and it's a revitalization of the Monroe Doctrine, right? In the Western Hemisphere is ours, and we're going to support democracies in the Western Hemisphere. And if you don't have a true democracy and you're exploiting your people, then beware. And so it's a strong play. And I've seen these numbers now that I guess you can bet on anything now, which to me is very, very troubling, and that's probably a topic for a different day.
Yes.
But the one that has gone up is Iran. I mean, will we take an action like this in Iran? And I don't know. But because I think they're focused on the Western Hemisphere, and I think, like you said, Holly, I think Cuba should be. If I were nervous. If I were a leader in Cuba, I'd be nervous right now.
I think so.
And I think Trump is willing to listen to very bold ideas, and I think in this case he listened to. I don't think this is a Trump originated idea. This is Marco Rubio.
I certainly
agree. This is Marco Rubio,
yeah.
and his influence is certainly there, and I give him credit. This is a well executed. I mean, I think if you look at 1979, the failures of the Jimmy Carter administration, this is a well executed military operation. Delta Force should get all the kudos for that. But it took a Secretary of State being able to convince a president, and then it took a president being willing to execute on it. So, I mean. Can we be against more freedom?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's where I think the Wall Street Journal, yes, there is oil, but this isn't. I mean, if this were oil executives convincing Trump to do this, I mean, it's such a long play that it's just that's not what this is about.
And I think this points out that, this idea that it was done for the oil companies, which I hear all the time from my liberal friends. But first of all, this points out it'd be a long time before ExxonMobil and some of the others even want to go back because they have an infrastructure there that is really questionable anyway. Mm-hmm. But back to your key point, I did a commentary that came out on Tuesday on the national security strategy, and I said it's very obvious who put that together. His name is Marco Rubio, because he was on this program on Point of View 2 years ago talking about his book, The Decades of Decadence, and that is where he starts talking about the strategic alliances. He started talking about the Russians, the Chinese, and Iranians that were in Venezuela. He's from Cuba. He's talking about what we need to do to maybe prevent Russia and China from working together and all sorts of other things. And if you read the national security security strategy, which came out in December. And I know most people won't read it. So if you want to just read something short, like the Cliff Notes version, that's the Tuesday commentary by me. And I think that's exactly the case. And doesn't, for this matter, doesn't Marco Rubio look like president right now? I mean, a lot of people say, well, maybe J.D. Vance is the next president, and maybe he is. But I don't think anybody would be disappointed if Marco Rubio is the next president.
Marco Rubio is looking very presidential right now. And I mean, there was some, how can you be Donald Trump's, how do you survive as Donald Trump's Secretary of State? And I think Marco Rubio has demonstrated this is how you survive. You actually do you actually do stuff.
Yeah. Red lines mean something, and threats mean something, and all that. Real quickly, Maria Corina Machado, who, when she comes into this country, is talking about wanting to give her Peace Prize award to President Trump. Whether that happens or not is kind of interesting, but she is the one that pointed out there's a lot of other things. Hamas, Hezbollah is in there. Iranians are in there. By the way, Cubans, there were 35 Cubans that were killed in this operation. They're there. So you've got all of that going on. The next door neighbor is Colombia, and you've got all the drug cartel there. So she's talking about just all sorts of strategic alliances. She even talked about Bitcoin and the fact that that has been something that the Venezuelans have been able to do, because every 4 days for a while with inflation, the value of the bolivar dropped by half. I mean, matter of fact, I'm going to bring my copies of Bolivar up when we get back from the break here, just because I like to do show and tell. I've got one that's 1 million Bolivar, and it's worth paper it's printed on, but that shows you that somebody says it's just about oil. No, it was about a lot more. And I think, again, President Trump is thinking strategically. We haven't even gotten into Greenland yet, but we will get to that. And when we come back, though, the other protests are now in Iran. And what does that might mean as well? So if you get bored, all you have to do is just pay attention to the news. The other day we had Robert Knight on, and he says you just can't keep track of it all. I mean, there are things happening domestically, there are things happening internationally, and at a time when, remember in Jimmy Carter, the malaise, and the fact is we were saying maybe the presidency is too big for any one person. And Donald Trump comes in and says, I'm only going to sleep about 4 hours a day, and we're going to do everything we can, and here we are. And so when we come back, let's talk about Iran for a minute. We'll move on to some other topics, because there is a lot to cover today. But I just thought we'd do a little foreign policy before we get to domestic policy. And if you find yourself saying, okay, I want to read a few of these articles, we have posted them on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages. Stay tuned.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. Let's, if we can, spend just a few more minutes talking about foreign policy, and then most of the time we're going to bring it back to the United States. We have quite a bit to cover here, whether it's Minneapolis, whether it's Portland, whether it's the issue of waste, fraud, and abuse. I even got a quote here from Mitt Romney and a few other things we'll talk about. But for just a few minutes, let's, if we can, we have Jeff and Holly in studio. Jeff, if we want to go to Iran, I might want to remind our listeners that, first of all, this issue of Iranian issues goes all the way back to, of course, Ayatollah Khomeini, and we talked about the hostages. But even more recently, there was what was called a spring revolution in Iran. And the question was, will Barack Obama support it other than verbally? Well, it does seem that President Trump, not looking to put boots on the ground, but there are other ways he can influence foreign policy, and warned on Truth Social that if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded, ready to go. And right now, the Ayatollah Khomeini is saying, well, if you just stay here in Iran, we'll give you what effectively is $7 a day, which I'm not even sure where they get that, because they have inflation that's off the charts. As a matter of fact, I probably just at the next break need to bring my collection of all these inflated dollars, including some from Zimbabwe and a variety of other places that, as I said, are not worth the paper they're printed on. And Iran is going through all sorts of a crisis. And could this eventually lead to a regime change? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting because it is an opportunity to contrast what Obama did not do, which and from what we're hearing, after the fact is, I mean, really just discouraging an uprising versus the Trump approach, which is a complete opposite. And I think there is, I mean, this could happen because, one, you've got the verbal commitment in the United States. Of course, the Israel would love to see a regime change in Iran. And so we both have got operatives working in those countries. And I think we do anything short of military force to encourage a peaceful revolution in Iran, and we'll be the better for it. And you, again, as critical we can be of Donald Trump at times, this is another example where this doesn't happen but for Donald Trump, because
very true.
I don't know what other, certainly no other Democrat. We know what Biden, Obama would have done on this issue, but even a list of potential. I know we're going to talk about your friend Mitt Romney here in a little bit. I don't think Mitt Romney would have done much on this either, but it's pretty exciting. We could wake up one morning and see that regime toppled. Yeah. Trump being in a position where he can, one, verbally support it and then say things like he did about, if you shoot supporter, we're coming in now. I hope we don't do that, but just for, protester taking down. But at the same time, he is the art. He is the art of the deal, right? And so he's putting the pressure on them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, you had a Hamas leader that was killed in Iran, and which has caused a lot of people to kind of look under their bed. And just as Hezbollah is not real interested in beepers or anything like that, or cell phones, that's back to the point. It doesn't necessarily require boots on the ground, or you could certainly send in some kind of action against Iran, like we did against the nuclear forces. So that's kind of interesting that, Holly, we have never had a president that is playing to win. I mean, you have to go back to Ronald Reagan, when at one point he said, what can we do to defeat Russia? And there were people in the Pentagon go, well, we were always playing defense. No, I want to play offense. And you haven't had a president really with that kind of mindset until now. And only apart from Donald Trump does this happen.
Absolutely. And if you're an Iranian citizen, you've got to be looking at what's going on in Venezuela, and you're seeing these videos of Venezuelan citizens thrilled and excited and experiencing freedom. And also you have to recognize the United States kept their word there. And they're saying here that they're going to help us. So I think Jeff's right to say, we may wake up one morning and see regime change has happened in Iran. And what a difference that is from waking up, the morning of October 7th and looking at your phone while Biden was president and seeing, oh my gosh, this is horrific. Now we're living in a world where we wake up in the morning and see Venezuelans are thrilled because they're going to experience freedom, or potentially Iranians are, experiencing regime change because we have a president that does what he says he's going to do.
Well, and we had what was it called, the Spring Uprising, is it with it? But you have a spring
revolution,
spring uprising when you actually have a president who's committed to supporting those who want freedom. I do think, Kerby, that the pager thing is not going to work this time.
That was so brilliant. That was brilliant.
I don't think they'd fall for it twice, but I guess they could try and see if they would. But I don't think it'll work again.
Yeah, they might not want to get a BlackBerry, a pager, or even a cell phone because they don't know what's going to happen. But
no, we ought to
just
ship them a thing of Apple iPhones and then see what they think.
Not one of them will use. They'll stay in the boxes. Back to Holly's point. Okay, think about where we were October 7th, 2 years ago, 2+ years ago now, and where are we now? Hamas is really degraded in such a significant way as to almost not be any significant threat to Israel, although there's still cleanup action there. Hezbollah, we've lost a lot of the leadership, and the Houthis, they're still trying to do some things in Somalia. We haven't even talked about Somalia yet, but we'll get to Somalia when we talk about Minnesota in just a minute. But these are all so degraded now that actually Israel is much safer than it was. Partially also because now that the Iranian rial, which is their currency, is worth virtually nothing, they don't have the money to send to those other groups. Again, let's remind ourselves, not so long ago, again, maybe the old two around the table, remember when pallets of $100 bills showed up in Iran? Do you remember that under Barack Obama?
Yeah, under Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how
and we were thinking that we will buy these people off, which was one idea. And Donald Trump has a different idea. We will just blow these people up and get them to actually join the international community and not run a rogue terrorist nation.
Yeah, I mean, recognize the might of the United States and what we can do if you sort of cross our foreign policy. I think, we talk a lot on this show about Trump's domestic agenda, and, we debate and discuss what's going on. And I think there's a lot of that to go on there. But his foreign policy has been very good. And I think it's because part of his personality is just, let's go, let's do this. And I think that's respected as a world player. And I think that's encouraging. And so what he's done in the Middle East for global security, really, I think is going to be part of his greatest part of his legacy.
I think another part of the story in Iran, I think we've heard, and maybe we talked about it months ago, is that the reports are from trusted missionaries that there's a real revival of revival. I guess is the wrong word because it's not reviving. It's Christianity expanding.
Yeah.
The
fastest growing church in the world is the Iranian church.
Yeah, and that has got to be because of. I mean, we certainly. I mean, that is that belief in Christ and the freedom that comes in Christ results in, like, our own great awakening is the word I want to use. There's an awakening happening, like our nation was founded out of a great awakening. That I think we could be watching that in our own lifetime in Iran, and that's, to me, is just beyond exciting.
Well, again, we just wanted to cover some of those. And again, just thinking back, many years ago, we actually did fundraising here at Point of View for what was called the Iranian Bible School. And it wasn't in Iran, it was in Turkey. But what they would do is they would smuggle out to various pastors to give them some biblical education in Turkey and then come back into Iran. And now the possibility of even thinking about the Iranian Bible school being in Iran is just something that you wouldn't have thought about not so long ago. So the various circumstances on the ground in the Middle East have changed dramatically. Not to say that it's all over. You still have the Houthis and you still have Hezbollah a little bit, and you certainly have the threat of a possible nuclear Iran, but I think some things have changed quite a bit. So we've done a little bit on foreign policy. By now, I'm sure some of you want to say, well, what about Minneapolis? What about now Portland? Because we've had shootings there. We'll get into some of that. Then next hour, we'll get into waste, fraud, and abuse. And since Jeff mentioned my buddy, I've interviewed him all at once, Mitt Romney says, tax me, for saying, well, that's fine. We'll tax you. You're free to pay as much as you want. But that, I think, illustrates, again, some of the issues with our foreign policy and our domestic policy. So let's get back to what's happening here in the United States. And let's open up the phones to 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. We'll be right back.
Most studies show married women are happier, but a recent Pew survey shows young men are more interested in marriage than young women. Politics is a factor. An NBC News survey published in September found that Gen Z men who voted for Trump rate having children as the most important thing in their definition of success, while Gen Z women who voted for Harris ranked having children as the second least important thing in their personal definition of success. Emily Jashinsky worked for author Christina Hoff Sommers in the 2013 re-release of her book, The War Against Boys. Ms. Jashinsky, currently Washington correspondent for the conservative British news outlet Unheard, says the latest research on young adults shows that Ms. Sommers' 2000 book was prescient. Men are falling behind women on many fronts, including college enrollment and degrees earned, employment prospects, and now the ability to find a spouse. Of the gap between men and women's desire for marriage and family, she writes, as some men struggle for economic opportunity, women are adjusting their expectations and desires. Seeing a pool of less marriageable men, young women are turning their backs on the institution. Since more women are achieving financial independence, many of them don't feel they need men in the same way women once did. Richard Reeves, founder of the American Institute of Boys and Men, says, we understate the extent to which men need that purpose. They need to be needed. Richard Reeves was asked by Washington Post podcaster Shadi Hamid about the downside of all the choices provided by online dating. With dating apps, there's this grass is greener dynamic. Am I choosing exactly the right person? When you find someone, he says, remember, it's really about how are you going to be in the relationship. For men, it's less about picking the perfect wife and more about being a good husband. Better yet, be a man of faith. Find a woman of faith. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll spend some time, first of all, talking about what's happening in Minneapolis and then what has happened recently in Portland as well. Yesterday, you might remember, we posted a very good piece by Charles Cook in which he said, and I think wisely so, we don't know all the facts. Now that we know a little bit more, I think some of the things that have been said were inaccurate, to put it mildly. But first of all, you are going to have people trying to use this to advance their agenda. After I finished, I was driving north to go to the Hope Center, and on one of the bridges there, you had a sign that said, Renee was murdered by ICE. You know, and you're seeing people say, well, ICE executed a peaceful protester, ICE murdered a peaceful protester, ICE assassinated a peaceful protester. That's not the case. On the other hand, you've had some saying, well, she was just in a car, it did not pose any threat. After all, she was driving a Honda Pilot. I didn't post it, and I didn't want you to see it, but this is a story that has come out about Baltimore County police officer Amy Caprio, who was actually in a situation in which she was run over and killed by a car. So when somebody says, well, a car is not a weapon, well, just tell that to the family of the Caprios. And I think, again, I have not necessarily done the work on this, but according to Charles Cook, even a Honda Pilot is 4,000 pounds, and you hit the accelerator and you think you're going to be killed. That is the case. We know a lot more now. We know there are all second guessing, but at the same time, here we are. I mean, we are living, Holly, in such a polarized environment that you can't even try to put facts on the table without people using it to push their particular agenda. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think this story is an illustration of just all around everything about it is bad, sad, wrong, proof that we live in a fallen world filled with evil and, sadness, right? You've got the issue of illegal immigrants coming into our country, ICE attempting to take back our nation from a influx of illegal immigrants. You've got people trying to protest and losing their lives, whatever your calculus on what happened and what went down is, I think it's just, this is awful from all directions. Mm-hmm. I hope that this doesn't chill ICE's efforts to protect our country. I hope this doesn't chill protesters in enforcing peacefully, enforcing, their rights under the First Amendment to protest, again, peacefully and respectfully, needs to be said. But I think it's one of those things where, you said it best. People are going to jump in, they're going to offer their opinion, they're not going to holistically look at, okay, what went down? They're not going to watch the video. I admittedly have not watched the video. This is also my first time speaking publicly about it, and I think I'm admitting I don't know what side was right or wrong. So it's just, there's no shortage of just, this is unfortunate. It's a terrible situation. Sad it happened. What do we do next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tragic, but, and this could cause some controversy, but I do, put my in the shoes of the law enforcement, the ICE officer. What a difficult job and position.
Not a job I'd want. Yeah. And he'd been hit before.
And he'd been hit before.
And if you've seen the
and again, I'm not trying to justify what he did, but I just
may have overreacted if he did. But, I'm just being fair to everybody on this.
And I did get to participate when I was at the Attorney General's office. I got to participate in a little law enforcement training. And when you go through and being on the course, and when you go through and where you have, you're going, and then they people pop up and you have the option to shoot or not shoot, good guy, bad guy, and it's a split second decision.
Yes, it is.
And I would not be based upon my participation in that, I would not be a good law enforcement. I mean, I would have. One, you're either going to hesitate so much that you're not effective and you're not protecting, or you do. And again, I'm not trying to justify what this man did, but at the same time, I think we have to think about the law, the position, because of where we are in the country right now, the division in the country. What we're asking those ICE officers to do, which I agree with Holly, they need to be doing. We need to enforce. I mean, if you have laws, we believe in rule of law. Well, if you believe in rule of law, then you have to enforce those laws.
Of course.
And we need to be enforcing those laws. But we're putting these men and women who are serving us in very difficult situations. So we should not be surprised that these type of things happen. Doesn't mean that makes it any less tragic, and that this woman who was killed, yes, she has as all do, they have a right to protest, as Holly said, peacefully, and in compliance with the law. But let's not forget that our law enforcement are being placed in very difficult situations. But that shouldn't be the response. Shouldn't be, well, then we shouldn't put them in those situations. It should be, look, we obviously more training and more education just for all of us to understand the work they're doing.
Let me talk about Portland for just a minute, because this one is made the news. But again, it has been maybe a good example of what we were talking about, Holly, people jumping to their conclusions. And the situation, if you're not familiar, is you had a driver and a passenger, Venezuelan illegal alien with the transnational Trinidad Agua prostitution gang, also part of the shooting that was taking place here as well. And so what you have is, first of all, some great presentation. So let's, if nothing else, give some credit to the chief of police, the police chief of Portland. But Jim Garrity puts it this way: elected officials don't really want peace or calm, because the police chief gives what he says is a Joe Friday-esque narration. Joe Friday was just the facts, ma'am. And going through, we've been tested and some difficulties here, and it's been difficult over the last couple of days, and really comes down and argues for the fact that, if nothing else, we should remain calm. And I thought that was interesting. We are still in the early stages of the incident. We understand the heightened emotion and tension many are feeling in the wake of the shooting in Minneapolis, but I'm asking the community in Portland to remain calm as we work to learn more. I love that. Okay, 3 cheers for the police chief in Portland. Right after that, the mayor
How's
of
the mayor
Portland,
doing? How's the mayor doing?
Keith Wilson. Keith Wilson. Just one day after the horrific violence in Venezuela, our community here in Portland was witness to a moment of fear, confusion, and heartbreak. Earlier this afternoon, 2 people were shot, injured by federal agents in the Hazelwood neighborhood. Violence in our community is devastating. These are not statistics. These are human beings. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but you know where we go. And it just ratchets it up. And you start thinking of the Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry. You think about the Portland Mayor Keith Wilson. You think of course, you can mention the governor of the state of Minnesota, almost became your vice president. Or you can think of the governor of Oregon, Tina Kotek. And every single one of them is trying to ratchet it up as much as possible. Now, to be fair, Trump sometimes does the same. So I'll be equal opportunity. But right now, the people that are really ratcheting it up are the people who just a few minutes ago heard the police chief say to remain calm, and nobody's remaining calm.
No, of course not. That would be way too logical. Kerby, we live in the world where information gets on social media and it's gone like that, and the fans, have very much been on the flame. I'll say this quick, follow Ali Stuckey on Instagram, and she posted something about the ICE shooting and took it down later and just said, "I'm sorry, that was causing confusion. This is wrong. We need to see what was going on." And I respect that she was willing to use her platform to say, I'm not going to just post something because it was based on the first reactions. If it's causing confusion among my listeners, who I respect enough to give a true narrative of what happened, then I'm going to remove it and be upfront that I did that. So I think that is something admirable, and politicians should take note, but we'll see.
Well, if nothing else, let's give credit to at least the police chief in Portland. Remain calm. Not everybody did, but that's a lesson we should learn. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover right after this.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, second hour. We're going to spend some time talking about domestic policy. But before we do, let me just mention that my commentary today is about this book called Peak Human. Now, you might not be familiar with that, but it is written by Johan Norberg. We've quoted him before because he's been somebody to actually say that Bernie Sanders says that, Sweden is socialist. No, it's not, but his book really this time is about the golden ages of various empires. And he argues that we right now in the United States are in sort of a golden age. Donald Trump wants you to believe that, but he reminds us that there have been other times in which nations and empires have been in a golden age. One of those is Rome. And interestingly enough, the problem with Rome was that, he says, and I'm quoting him now, the emperors wanted to become popular by handing out free stuff to people. Originally, this started small. You just handed the very poor the means of subsistence, but it was popular, so the group that lived on the public's expense grew larger all the time. And so basically he said Romans could conquer the world, but they couldn't do entitlement reform. And then later on talks about inflation was much worse than the barbarian invaders. And last hour we talked about some of these countries, and just for those of you watching online, here's a 100 bolivar from Venezuela. Not sure it's worth the paper it's printed on. Here is one from Lebanon, a Lebanon pound, 100,000 pound, which is, again, worth nothing. It was in Turkey recently. I didn't get a big one, but here's 1,000 Turkish lira. But my all-time favorite, and you guys can vouch for this, a $100 trillion note for Zimbabwe. Now, when that began, the Zimbabwe dollar and the U.S. dollar were worth almost the same, and a $100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar.
I've been promised a dinner on Point of View's dime, and I'm wondering if that $1 trillion Zimbabwe dollar will help.
It's got to be like a great steakhouse or something.
Yeah, I'm only looking in one side of the column when you're flashing that kind of money around, Kerby.
Yeah, we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. You weren't here when we had Dr. Merrill Matthews, but we were talking about, this whole issue of course, Obamacare and all the rest. But that brings me to the piece by Cal Thomas, because all of a sudden now we have the Department of Health and Human Services. They discovered all these improper payments, and now they're tightening the requirements. And Cal Thomas says, what took them so long? The answer, it isn't their money. It's back to the problem we talked about before, isn't it, Holly?
Absolutely. I mean, waste, fraud, and abuse, we talked about that just during the break. There's some light topics to bring up here, and probably some things our government should be looking into, if you ask me. If it's my money, then I'd like to know where it's going, and I'd like to know who is receiving it and whether it's fraudulent or not. So, yeah, definitely something to pay attention to.
Well, and there's reports, the amount of money that the Somalis in Minnesota have received, and then how that money then is being funneled to terrorist organizations. I think Senator Cruz has been talking about that recently. And so they're stealing our money, and then they're using it to fund terrorist organizations to attack us. It's incredible. And then you've got, who's really turned out to be just like he's a character of himself. And I think you said, Kerby, this guy could have been vice president of the United States. And he really is. I mean, he's Bozo the Clown, right? I mean, you don't know who Bozo the Clown is, Holly.
You might have heard.
But you probably have heard of it. And I'm trying to think. I mean, it's just, I mean, he's a character of himself. And where have we? I mean, how does this happen? I mean, how do you have this much fraud occurring? And then we're hearing reports that Minnesota's just not the only place.
Oh, not even close.
Happening.
Matter of fact, they're saying that's just a small country.
Yeah, because let's go to California.
Yes,
let's go to California and see what's going on. So, I do think Cal Thomas, as he often does, is so insightful. And he talks about the first how do we fix this? Well, we need to elect better people to Congress.
Maybe he's living in a dream world with that one.
I mean, yes, we do. And this is, you've heard me get on my soapbox about term limits, but I still think that is a part. It's not the solution. It's part of the solution.
Yeah, he's got three, but let's for a minute camp out on that.
Yeah.
You're from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn. I think he did.
Yep.
You're from state of Texas. How about, Ted Cruz, Chip Roy? I mean, I recognize that there are a lot of people that just get along to go along, but let's give credit where credit is due. There have been some that have been budget hawks. We just need a whole lot more of them, don't we?
A lot more.
Yeah, so that was one suggestion that was interesting there. He talked about also a convention of the states, which, you hardly ever hear anybody talking about, but amending the Constitution. And then, of course, just all sorts of other things, an income tax rebellion.
Well, I think
Doge didn't work very well.
Yeah,
I mean,
Doge didn't work very well.
There's a sense of frustration on the part of the American people. Go ahead.
I think what's interesting is what identified this problem is a 20-year-old kid with a video camera. And I know we spend a lot of time kind of harping on social media, but this is like a social media driven effort to uncover this abuse. So you have to give them some credit for this intuitive kid with a TikTok or YouTube account that went and posted it. And I think when Tim Walz announced he wasn't seeking re-election, tweeted something like, "I just ended Tim Walz's career," which is hilarious that, we live in a country where a 20-year-old with a video camera can do that. I guess it's a benefit of democracy. So yeah, we can identify how to solve the problem, but first we have to give credit to who brought the problem to us.
And one of the other ones I might mention is Christopher Rufo, who we quote often, and he writing with, again, Manhattan Institute. Notice that this was not the Wall Street Journal. Notice this was not the New York Times. Notice it was not necessarily Fox News or The Nation or Atlantic or the Brookings Institute or the Heritage Foundation, whatever. It tended to be two individuals at the Manhattan Institute or one individual that is just a YouTuber with a phone, right?
Right.
And
it's a kid bored on Christmas break.
But again, they're talking about levels of abuse. You've been here when we've had Dr. Merrill Matthews, who co-authored a book on this issue of this. If it gets close to $1 trillion, that's half the deficit. And we are talking about something that every politician says, well, we want to run against waste, fraud, and abuse, but how much have we been able to do? And it seems to me like we ran Doge out of town, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to be the cuts were too deep apparently, and they were able to too much pain, and therefore it's done. And having been in D.C. earlier this week, they're all back there. It's back. And I actually saw people in our office building, which I think I've told before. I mean, I've been in there and have seen no one from the government, but people are back at work. I saw some human beings who appear to be government employees, and they were doing something.
Alleged
I'm not so
government
sure.
employees.
I don't know about 5 o'clock if they were there at 5, but
you weren't there on a Friday.
I was not there on a Friday.
There you go.
That's a different story.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break because the answer to that apparently is, well, we don't need to try to trim the budget. We need to tax more people. So Mitt Romney had a suggestion about that. I did a commentary on it, but also a couple of individuals writing in the Wall Street Journal also had some comments about that. So let's get into that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In his book, Peak Human, historian Johann Norberg explains what we can learn from the rise and fall of golden ages. He describes 7 humanity's greatest civilizations, from ancient Athens and the Roman Republic to Renaissance Italy, the Dutch Republic, and today's Anglosphere. Each had their golden age and contributed to our world today. Ancient Greece gave us democracy and the rule of law. From the Muslim world came algebra and modern medicine. The Dutch Republic gave us economic ideas and some of the greatest artistic movements. In a recent interview with John Stossel, he talked about how Rome inspired our form of government, a republic with a system of checks and balances. There's a reason we have a Senate and they meet in the Capitol, Norberg explained. We borrowed these ideas from the Romans. Of course, these empires fell. The emperors wanted to become popular by handing out free stuff to people. Originally, this started small. Just handed the very poor means of subsistence, but it became popular, so the group that lived on the public's expense grew larger all the time. Eventually, the ever-expanding system of entitlements became too much. Norberg observed, Romans could conquer the world, but they couldn't do entitlement reform. To pay for this, the Roman emperors devalued their currency by putting less gold and silver in each coin. He concluded that inflation was much worse than barbarian invaders. This sounds like our world today. Modern governments, including our own, make more financial promises than they can keep. To pay for it, they print more money. We have been living in a golden age, but the question before us today is whether it will continue. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We've talked about the problem, and that is we're spending more than we're taking in. We need to do entitlement reform, and Romans couldn't do entitlement reform. I'm not sure the United States is going to do entitlement reform, but we are spending more than we're taking in. We're promising more than we have money for it, so we just print more money. But the only other solution, and Mitt Romney has it, well, just tax me. Tax the rich like me is the headline in his op-ed. And so, Holly, I just thought I know exactly what Jeff's going to say, but I'd love to get your thoughts. And I did a commentary about this about a week ago. And even when I was out on a walk, had somebody grab me and say, I love your Mitt Romney piece. Because what you said is, well, go ahead. You're free to pay more. There's nothing wrong with that. But the other individuals that have written this, Clifford Arsness as well as Michael Mendelson, have said, we actually supported you for your campaign. We cannot imagine now you're joining the likes of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and others that are just simply saying, well, we're rich, so tax us more. But the bottom line is there's a lot of people that aren't in your position, Mitt Romney. You made your money in Bain Capital, and now maybe you can afford to pay more, but you're going to hurt a lot of other people because the only way we can close this gap is to actually tax the middle class.
Well, I don't know if Mitt Romney thinks this seems like genuine or endearing, like, oh, please tax me. It just seems, to me to read like a lot of false humility, because we all know that Mitt Romney is not going to pay those taxes. He's got so much money.
Good point.
And when you have a lot of money, you can afford really good lawyers that know the tax code really well and can find you every little in and out to avoid paying that money. So, I mean, yeah, sure, Mitt Romney can say tax me, but we all know he's not paying those taxes, so someone's going to have to. And then that's where we feel like, okay, the middle class is getting kind of railroaded here, right? But I don't know. It's not genuine to me. It sounds like socialism light. And am I surprised from Mitt Romney? No. But I don't know. Maybe someone will defend him around the table.
I doubt it.
Are you looking at me?
I'm looking at you, Jeff, to be the great defender of Mitt Romney.
I put this one in just because I knew what Jeff was going to say.
I wasn't old enough to vote for Mitt Romney, but I bet both of you guys were probably
in the general election, yes, but certainly not in the primary. Mitt Romney, like a lot of liberal Republicans and all Democrats, believe that we have a revenue problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We don't have. I mean, the taxes are. We have a spending problem.
Yes.
And the answer is not. The answer is not. I mean, do you think how devastating that some of these proposals? And again, it's so funny. He makes proposals which to institute taxes that he wouldn't have to pay
anyway.
And so yeah, that's we ought to. So he needs to stay retired. He certainly has a right to have his views. The Wall Street Journal doesn't need to publish those views, quite frankly. When Republicans start talking about increasing taxes, Republicans lose elections.
Yeah.
I mean, George H.W. Bush.
Read my lips.
Read my lips, and then didn't follow his own advice. That's how he loses elections. That's how Republicans lose election. Democrats, let the Democrats talk about raising taxes. Republicans should never talk about raising taxes. I think what we ought to be talking about is how do we get to a balanced budget? How do we get a handle on the national debt?
Yes. Well, and again, his article was in the New York Times, but these guys were in the Wall Street Journal. And I quoted the Wall Street Journal on another piece in which he, was making this case, but I made the case in my commentary about the fact that he made his fortune at Bain Capital, and then the editor said, yeah, he can afford to pay more, but would a 28-year-old Mitt still on the make have thought so? Raising taxes makes it harder for others to get rich. And their argument is being made, and I thought that's why I wanted to get this into the conversation. We're going to hear during this season, once again, that the rich need to pay their fair share. And I just think the first question you have to ask is, what's the fair share? The top 1% of earners pay more than 40% of all of that. We have a more progressive income tax than many of the countries in Europe. And just to put that on the other side, 50%, the bottom 50% only pay 3% of the taxes. So we know that it is front-loaded, and you might want the few individuals, whether it's Elon Musk or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or whatever, to pay. But the bottom line is, that's back to what you said, Holly, they don't have income. They have assets. And unless you start going down the road, and that's why our February issues about socialism, which says we need to have appreciated assets that you have not received. In other words, unrealized capital gains. There is really no way to turn that around, which is why you have a lot of young people saying, well, then let's just turn that around and just say that if your house appreciated 100%, then you have to pay taxes on that 100% appreciation in your house. And Jeff is not looking with a positive look in his face.
Again, if we want to crush the middle class, then let's crush, because that's what, a lot of these taxes that Romney and others, and that's right. His article was in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Not surprised the New York Times would publish.
Yeah, I don't think the Wall Street Journal would have published it.
And the criticism was in the Wall Street Journal. But no, these are taxes on working people. And these are the people who make America, and we want, and again, he doesn't remember when he was young, and he's a billionaire. Just stay in Utah, do your thing, but we don't need this type of Republican.
But again, I think it illustrates the point that is there something else that we can do with the tax code. You and I have talked about before, Jeff, that a flat tax would make a lot more sense because he does point to these carve-outs. He refers to them even as caverns, which I love. There they say these caverns he was willing to spelunk down to benefit from. So some of these carve-outs that make no sense are the case. And it's something else to remember because we're going to be in this election season where members of Congress are going to say the rich need to pay their fair share, but you're in Congress and you allowed and voted for all these carve-outs, all these various opportunities and loopholes to exist. And when Bernie Sanders has been in the Congress, been in the Senate longer than you've been alive, it does seem to me that somewhere along the line you have to say, well, you bear a lot of the benefit and the responsibility as well.
Yeah, I remember the whole Trump tax records drama when everyone was so mad that he wasn't paying very much in taxes. I thought, your problem isn't with Donald Trump. Your problem is with the United States Congress, who wrote those into law. He just has lawyers that know how to use them. So I think was it Ted Cruz when he was running in 2016 that wanted to put the tax code on a napkin? Was that the thing? So you may hear whisperings of that coming back. I would question.
No, I think that, that even we'll go further back than Ted Cruz 2016. We'll talk about Jack Kemp, who we probably both were big fans of. I guess, Kerby. I don't know if we've ever talked about Congressman Kemp, but
we've interviewed him many times on the program when he was alive.
And as easy as a flat tax. You want to do it? Just have a flat tax. Everybody, no deductions. And just a flat tax, and everybody pays the same.
That would make April and March a lot more enjoyable. My weekends, and
maybe you have a minimum.
Taxes.
Maybe everybody, you have a minimum and whatever. But these are probably questions we'll have to talk to Dr. Matthews about, because I think what he'd say is we don't raise enough money. But my corollary was that is flat tax. It is a fat tax. Flat tax, and then massive cuts.
And again, that napkin test goes back to Arthur Laffer and the so-called Laffer curve, which again everybody laughed at, but it really recognized that there comes a point in time where if you raise the percentage of taxation so much, then as a result there is a tremendous disincentive to go involved in any kind of entrepreneurial work. And if you go back and find one of my commentaries, I point out that the author of Pippi Longstocking, because of what they had in terms of the tax code at the time in, I think Sweden, isn't she still in Sweden? Yeah, was 112%, because they had, a 90% tax rate, but then you take the local one, that's called a disincentive, where you actually have to pay more for doing work. People just don't work any longer when you have it at that high. And I remember Ronald Reagan used to talk about that. He would work on so many movies, and once he realized it was going to put him in the next tax bracket, he just didn't work anymore. That's the problem. You think you can tax the rich, but you really can't. There aren't enough rich people, and you're going to create so much disincentive that you're really going to have to then go and tax the middle class. And like Jeff said, if you want to ruin the middle class, just keep voting for socialists. I think we have one in New York City. I want to come back and get your comments about that before we move on to another topic right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Holly Randall, Jeff Mateer in studio with us. Let me just mention that I have a couple other articles to address. We will be hearing Hannah Dexter's commentary, which will come out in about 15 minutes. And if you are on your computer, you'll be able to hear it. Of course, you can read it as well at the website pointofview.net. Also, I just might mention that we have sent out a mailing telling you that we have about $20,000 worth of matching funds. So many of you may have said, well, I gave in December, but now it's January. And we're already coming up to a date that's getting close to the middle of this month. So if you've been one of those people that says, well, I would certainly like to give, but maybe I'd like to see my particular contribution doubled, we have a mailing that went out, and you can click on that button either on the website or on the one that we have provided for you in the email. But just for a minute, I thought I'd go around the round table. Our next issue is going to be on the issue of socialism. This one, are Christianity and socialism compatible? I've got some very interesting articles, one on socialism in America. That will be coming out in February. The one by Gary Bauer, Jesus Wasn't a Socialist, that generated all sorts of reaction. And then Liberty McCarter's Understanding Socialism's Rising Popularity. So one of the benefits of supporting Point of View is the fact that we, if you're a monthly giver, send you the Outlook magazine. Of course, if you give at the Truth Team level, then you will also receive the booklets. And my booklet just last month was on The Road to Serfdom, which is based on Friedrich Hayek's book. I think a lot of people say, I don't know who Friedrich Hayek is. Is that Selma Hayek's father? No, he's a Nobel Prize winner and wrote one of the best critiques of socialism, which brings me to the inaugural speech of Zoran Mamdani. And if for too long our communities have existed as distinct from one another, we will draw this city together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. Who wants to go first? Well, Jeff is shaking his head. Of the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. We did mention some people that have actually addressed that issue of what collectivism gave us in the 20th century. Can you wax eloquent on that for a moment?
Well, I don't know if I can wax eloquent, but he should tour some places, like maybe go to Venezuela and
have fun in Russia
and see how it's kind of worked out, how it's worked out in Cuba. He's the mayor of our largest city. He won an election.
Mm-hmm. You have to wonder if this statement...
he's a communist.
Yeah.
Socialism, I think people use the word socialism because it sounds softer.
Yeah.
But then Marxism, communism.
And
he's a Marxist.
He's called
That's a
himself
Marxist statement.
It is.
That's a Marxist statement, and it is truly un-American. It's the opposite of what our founders believed.
Right, Thomas Jefferson is outraged.
Yeah, and what would Hamilton be?
Teddy Roosevelt, he's upset too.
It's probably, Woodrow Wilson might kind of say, this is where it leads to. But no, I just, those are some of the statements, and then of course some of his appointments have just been.
Here we go.
Yeah,
even the New York Times has said, "Okay, that's a bit much."
Yeah, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. And my wife and I talked about this the other day. We love Broadway. We like Broadway shows, but I don't know if I want to go to New York. But then I said, but if we want to go in the next 4 years, we probably should go now because it's going down. It's going down. Of course, Kerby, you and I both remember before Rudy Giuliani, New York was a mess.
What a mess.
Unsafe. No one wanted to go to. Yeah. And it's give credit where credit's due. Rudy Giuliani turned that city around, and post Giuliani, it's been. They've really had it and it's been a good place to go. They've cleaned up. You can go to Times Square. It is safe again. I'm not so sure going forward Because if you're in New York, I mean, and I think Governor Abbott said this. I mean, look, if you're a business in New York, I mean, you don't want to be in New York. So come to Texas.
The
apparently
warm
not to
embrace of
Dallas.
Texas.
Apparently not Dallas, because you probably want to come to Plano like AT&T, who's leaving downtown Dallas. But no, come to Texas.
Again, let me.
It's your generation that caused this. I mean, so.
Don't blame me.
Don't blame me.
It's your generation voted for Madami.
Let me hold these up. Socialism. Yeah. This booklet on socialism. That's where we give you the list of the various countries, even those which are really socialist. And the list is about 24 that all have been failed. And the argument always is, Holly, well, we just didn't do it right. That's why the December issue of the booklet is The Road to Serfdom, because I think it's about time that even if you don't know who Friedrich Hayek is, you never heard of the book, and you're never going to read it, this is like the Cliff Notes, to just show you why it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because of human nature. It doesn't work because people that get into power want to control other people. They're ambitious, they're selfish, and a decentralized economy, like a free market, is going to protect you. A centralized economy where a few bureaucrats determine what you get or what you don't get and what prices are, it's always a disaster. Always has been.
I mean, this statement is so insane upon hearing it. You kind of have to wonder if it's a little bit of a setup. I mean, there's politicians out there that abide by the rule that being talked about is a good thing. No press is bad press. And I just wonder, did he say that just so we would all be yelling about him?
No, I think he absolutely believes it.
Absolutely believes in collectivism.
He might have said it to gather attention, but I think based upon everything I've read about him, he absolutely believes it.
Yeah. Somewhere along the way, he forgot our country. Yeah, was founded on the idea of,
he's made AOC is to the right of him.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, AOC is to the right of him.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Not much, but
we're talking about something that's real radical. Well, I could camp out on that, but I did want to at least get this one in because we have the case against annexing Greenland yesterday. We have the case today for annexing Greenland, and that's Roger Kimball. And who would have guessed? But every time you turn around, Donald Trump's talking about, we need Greenland. And some of the other people involved in this are involved with that as well. It's got the quote there from Stephen Miller. You love Stephen Miller. And they're saying, can you rule out that the U.S. is never going to take Greenland by force? Of course they're not. But then instead, what do you have? Stephen Miller says, Greenland should be part of the United States. So there you go. I just didn't see that one coming. But anything the president talks about too often, not everything comes to pass, but not very much happens, which he hasn't talked about. And he's talked about this a lot.
If there is a treasure trove of oil and minerals to become a part of the United States, then I think we could squeeze a little room on the flag for the 51st star.
Well, I don't think we're talking about them becoming a state.
Why not?
I mean, a territory. But no, I mean, I think Trump is negotiating. I think he's negotiating. I mean, I don't think.
Part of the deal.
I do not think that the American public are going to stand for like an invasion that we actually would invade. I do think Trump has been convinced that Greenland is key to our security, and and others have written. I mean, this is not just made up. It is very much a key strategic place in the world, and Europe's not going to. I mean, Denmark is not going to do anything. I mean, they're to protect those interests, and so I think Trump's doing what he often does, which is he's using his bully pulpit and trying to do it. I mean, it's the art of the deal. He's trying to do a deal, and it would be akin to us buying. I mean, we're going to buy it, and in the end, the people of Greenland will love being part of America. I mean, there's only 50,000 of them. They said
it's not for sale, but Denmark is not Denmark anymore. And back to this national security strategy, I think what it is that Trump also concludes, and I think Jeff and I probably agree on this one too, that Europe is gone. You know, and there was a book years ago by Mark Stein, America Alone, and I think he's recognizing I can't depend on Denmark to be Denmark anymore, as the Muslim influence has made its way into the Netherlands, into France, even to the UK. Europe is not Europe anymore, and as a result, if we're going to talk about a strategic alliance, better to have land, especially that, which gives you passage both to the Arctic Sea and the Atlantic. That, not to mention, if you've ever played the board game Risk, that was one of those pieces you might want to have in your particular portfolio, but also just in terms of rare earths and who knows what else. It's a very strategic place, and I wouldn't have even thought we'd be talking about Greenland 2 years ago, but here we are, and you just never know. We'll take a break, be back with more right after this.
Most studies show married women are happier, but a recent Pew survey shows young men are more interested in marriage than young women. Politics is a factor. An NBC News survey published in September found that Gen Z men who voted for Trump rate having children as the most important thing in their definition of success, while Gen Z women who voted for Harris ranked having children as the second least important thing in their personal definition of success. Emily Jashinsky worked for author Christina Hoff Sommers in the 2013 re-release of her book, The War Against Boys. Ms. Jashinsky, currently Washington correspondent for the conservative British news outlet Unheard, says the latest research on young adults shows that Ms. Sommers' 2000 book was prescient. Men are falling behind women on many fronts, including college enrollment and degrees earned, employment prospects, and now the ability to find a spouse. Of the gap between men and women's desire for marriage and family, she writes, as some men struggle for economic opportunity, women are adjusting their expectations and desires. Seeing a pool of less marriageable men, young women are turning their backs on the institution. Since more women are achieving financial independence, many of them don't feel they need men in the same way women once did. Richard Reeves, founder of the American Institute of Boys and Men, says, "We understate the extent to which men need that purpose. They need to be needed." Richard Reeves was asked by Washington Post podcaster Shadi Hamid about the downside of all the choices provided by online dating. With dating apps, there's this grass is greener dynamic. Am I choosing exactly the right person? When you find someone, he says, remember, it's really about how are you going to be in the relationship. For men, it's less about picking the perfect wife and more about being a good husband. Better yet, be a man of faith. Find a woman of faith. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, just before we leave you today, we do want to say a few more things about especially Penna Dexter's commentary. But before I do so, let me mention that next week we're going to have Leland Ryken with us. He is emeritus professor from Wheaton, and we'll get into some very important aspects of church history, one that certainly affects everybody around the table here. We also have an individual by the name of Mark David Hall, and he has written the book, Did America Have a Christian Christian Founding, Separating Modern Myth from Historical Truth. Now, I met him years ago when he was sitting right here where Holly was, when he was just sort of a rising star. I think at that time he had been at George Fox University, and he actually came in studio. Of course, has been to he's been to Liberty University. Also, I know that when they had the first presentation for the Religious Liberty Commission, they had him speak. You guys know who he is. Yeah. And so we've known him since he wasn't as well known. He's very well known now. And it again is the 250th anniversary of this country, which is why we have some of the booklets we've made available on America's godly heritage and on the Federalist Papers, as well as on the Bill of Rights. And we'll get into this whole idea of Christian Foundation and an individual that I know you two respect and have worked with as well. So that will be next week. And of course, Jeff, you'll be with me on Friday. So anything that we talk about with him, you can pick up on and critique or underscore, because I think he brings a lot to the table about understanding that. And right now, you have a PBS special on American Revolution, and it's got a little bit of wokeism, so I think we'll get into that as well. So lots of issues that we will be covering next week. But Holly, I wanted to get your thoughts about this. Penn and Extra's commentary today, Men Not Needed. Most stories show and most studies show that married women are happier, but interestingly enough, the Pew survey shows young men are more interested in marriage than young women. Gen Z men are more likely to be going to church than Gen Z women. What's going on? Can you speak to that?
Kerby, I was laughing when you sent this ahead of time to us to review, because I've done point of view sports, I've done point of view pop culture, and now we're doing point of view dating. I was thinking this is quite the interesting array of topics. But no, I mean, I agree with everything.
Should we open up the lines to see? And you can ask, are there any...
Yes, Holly, all the
questions.
Men,
25 to 35, would that be okay?
Yeah,
or 25 to 35, if we have any, just put them through, and we can, I can act like your dad and ask questions.
Be a man of faith, find a woman of faith. Is that what we're going to? No, I agree with everything Penn said. But I do think, yes, it's awesome that there are lots of men going to church and, being interested in marriage. But I don't think, and maybe I'm speaking from just my own perspective as a single woman that's focused on her career and living in a large city, I know a lot of other women in my position. I mean, I think we're moving toward a good trend, but I could name 5 or 10 godly women that are smart, that are, focused on building a career and being obedient to the Lord and how he leads them in marriage and family in that regard. And so I think men are definitely needed. It doesn't seem like the market is just overly saturated with men that are really also pursuing the Lord, being a man of faith, and looking for a godly wife. So there's my 2 cents.
That's good. Good 2 cents.
And I agree with you. I'm a father of an unmarried 30-something, and I think that would be her experience as well. And this prompted even a conversation in the office this week, and I'll say what I told Holly, and Aaron was a participant.
I think my parents are listening; they'll enjoy this.
But I mean, and this is what with my daughter. I mean, I'd rather them be unmarried than married to the wrong person, and whether that wrong person is an unbeliever, but even it could be a believer who's, I don't know what phrase I use, slug or something.
I think you called him a bozo.
Bozo, yeah.
Which speak of Bozo the Clown.
Bozo the Clown, yeah, another. That's been my favorite phrase today, I guess, in last week. But yeah, I mean, I would rather. I mean, as a parent, I think that's what I would rather, and I do think there is. These numbers are interesting. I'm not seeing it yet, which I guess is what you're saying as well, Holly. I'm not seeing it yet. You said 10, whatever. I think my wife and I probably have 40, and my wife kind of has a prayer list of people, 40 women, young women who would desire to be married, but just they've not had the opportunity because they haven't met that person. Now, I will say that there have been women on that list who just, and this is the encouragement part, if you so desire, but God does drop someone. I mean, it does happen, and we should continue to pray for that, for those who desire. but that you can also live, as Paul talks about, you can live a very fulfilled life as a single person. I think our churches are getting caught up to that.
They're realizing that. I think I will say, that the church is not perfect, but it's doing a good job of recognizing the blind spot, and that is adult singles, and trying to reach out to that community and not just focusing on, you have to be married to live a fulfilled, godly life. I think they're recognizing and catching up too. There's a lot of people out here that are doing lots of a variety of things, single and honoring the Lord in the meantime.
One of the things that I wanted to bring to the table is that we talk about the fertility drop, and a lot of that is the marriage drop. Between 1960 and 1980, that's a 20-year period, only 6% of 40-year-olds had never been married. Today, 1/4 of 40-year-olds have never been married. So we have recognized that we have what William Galston, in one of my commentaries I'm going to have coming out, the Great American Baby Shortage. But here's the interesting thing, and right now we're talking about Christian women and all the rest, but liberals aren't having as many kids, conservatives are. So you have a fertility gap, which is a pretty significant fertility gap as well, which suggests that if you play this out, the population is going to begin to decline, but you're also going to have many more individuals in the future that grew up in Christian homes and conservative homes than in secular homes and liberal homes. And what does that mean politically? So there are all sorts of implications to that. But if nothing else, I do applaud Penna for talking about this issue of men not needed. And it's interesting because back when Penna used to work with us, and she was on the program a couple weeks ago, we did do an interview with Christina Hoff Sommers, and back then that was the war against boys. And that was at a time when everybody was saying, no, women are the issue and feminism needs to assert themselves. And that's when Christina Hoff Sommers says, well, the feminist movement has worked very well. More women graduating from college, more women graduating from law school and medicine and everything else than men. And as a result, she was the first person to begin to understand that in some cases, you women have done a much better job than the men of that age. And that's why you look around and go, okay, who's the individual?
Come on, men, catch up.
Yeah, they need to catch up. So I thought it was good in a couple of points. Number one, giving us a little bit of history, but number two, talking about that whole issue of culture, which we'll talk about again. So, Jeff, I'm looking forward to next Friday. And, of course, we're going to be talking about some of these issues in between from a number of individuals. If you find yourself saying, well, you guys covered a lot of material, everything from First Liberty Institute, go to firstliberty.org. We have, of course, stuff about Venezuela. We've talked about Iran. We've talked about Minneapolis. We've talked about Portland. We've even talked about waste, fraud, and abuse, taxation, and Greenland, just to mention a few. Who knows what we're going to talk about next week? Because when we went off the air on Friday, we didn't know that Nicolas Maduro was going to be picked up. So
that was a surprise.
Never know what the weekend is going to bring. So while you're watching some of those football games and enjoying the weekend, I hope that you will take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Contact our friends there at First Liberty if you are aware of something where your religious liberty has been violated. They would love to help you out. And most importantly, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Enjoy the weekend. See you back here on Monday on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.